Welcome to Session 5 of MINEX Europe, focused on net zero pathways for mining green tech metals and circular economy. The mining sector in Europe is tasked with transitioning towards a net zero economy while ensuring sustainable practices. This transition is not only about reducing carbon emissions, but also about embracing circular economy principles and innovating through green technology. Our speakers will discuss the impact of the EU's carbon border adjustment mechanism on mining emissions, specifically regarding iron ore supply and costs. We will also examine trends in capital expenditure, goldmine emissions, and market dynamics for copper and lithium. Insights will be shared on the future of European battery supply chains, emphasizing the need to reduce reliance on imports and analyzing price forecasts for key commodities. Furthermore, we will discuss technologies aimed at minimizing waste and maximizing efficiency in mining operations. Lastly, we'll explore ventilation on demand technologies that improve mine safety while significantly lowering energy consumption. Join us as we navigate towards a sustainable future for the mining industry through green technologies and circular economy practices.
Thanks a lot. Good morning, everybody. Good to see you all. So as mentioned, today I'm going to start off talking about CBAM and the impacts to iron ore. Then move on to look at gold emissions. It's something new that we started looking at this year, S&P. And then at the end, hopefully spend a quick 5 minutes just maybe looking at some of the other topics we covered yesterday in terms of investment in Europe and some of the incentives or disincentives, perhaps, to develop mines in Europe. So all of the data from this presentation today is from our S&P Capital IQ platform. If you'd like more information, just let me know after the presentation. Okay, so starting off with CBAM. So what is CBAM? It's the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. So this is new EU regulation, which runs alongside ETS, the emissions trading scheme, which is designed by the EU to reduce emissions by 55% by 2030, and that's compared to the 1990 levels. The full intent is to reduce emissions, obviously, to net zero by 2050. So this is applied specifically to energy-intensive industries. Iron, steel, aluminium, electricity. And this is sort of as a global effort to reduce emissions, because if you're importing into the EU, you're going to have to use this as well as operating within the EU. So on this chart here, I've just got up the imports, or the value of imports of iron ore into the EU, and then the emissions intensity. As you can see, some of these countries are fairly high in the emissions intensity. Now, this is a number of factors. We'll dig a bit deeper into that into the next slides, but it's something that needs to be taken into account, I guess, by the EU for follow-up legislation. Okay, so on this chart on the left, the first chart, I've got the iron ore cash cost curve for 2024, and overlaid on that, I've got a scenario for 2034 once all of the emissions have actually been, or levies have been applied to iron ore coming to you. So this is using a forecast carbon price of around 160 euros. As you can see across the board, there's about a 10% increase in some of the charges, and this is increased to some of the more polluting countries, shall we say. We look at this a bit more on the other chart, which is a country breakup. So if we look, so US, for example, high carbon tax because of the emissions related to the production of the iron ore, same as Ukraine. We dig a bit deeper into this. This is not so much emissions due to the product, it's more due to the processing requirements. So Ukraine, US, Brazil, they're using more energy because they're producing pellets. Now, pellets generally higher grade, 63, 64% iron ore. They obviously use more processes in getting to that point. So grinding, flotation, magnetic separation. And these in the long term, further down the steel supply chain, actually reduce emissions in steel production. So once we get to steel mills, they're actually reducing emissions. So this is something that needs to be looked at, I guess, by the EU in further legislation. Another thing is, under the current CBAM framework, only Scope 1 emissions are actually being looked at. That removes the Scope 2, which is the energy or the emissions related to the electricity energy generation. So if we're looking at India or South Africa, for example, that's a very large component of the emissions related to some of these products. Okay. Moving on to gold next. Okay, got it. Yeah, so this is a new data set for us, actually. We started looking at emissions generally, but this is our sort of first gold. And this shows on the left, this is the Scope 1 and 2 emissions related to gold on a kilograms per ounce basis. On the right, kilograms per ton of ore milled basis. So as we can see, open pit mines, despite the larger scale and the lower grades, we're seeing about a third more emissions per ounce compared to underground mines. On the other hand, when we're looking at the ore milled basis, seeing about 3 times more CO2 emissions per ton of ore milled compared to underground mines. Now, as you probably know, this is slightly skewed due to some mines in South Africa. The energy makeup for the Scope 2 emissions, so the electricity production is very coal intensive there, coupled with, of course, the age of the South African mines, depth. They require a lot more ventilation than some of the newer operations around the world. If we look at this on a country-by-country basis, so again, on the right and the far right, that's South Africa, and you can see most of that's associated with Scope 2 emissions. But of the major producers, Canada is probably the best performer here. CO2 emissions around 315 kilograms per ounce, and that's improved from about 410 in 2020 when we first started tracking this. That's largely to do with the emissions related to Scope 2 again, improvements moving to renewable energy. It's also one of the first countries where companies started taking seriously sort of reducing their emissions footprint. Russia, again, is probably the next best performance, and that's around 450, a reduction of about 35% in emissions since 2020. And again, sort of due to local initiatives, particularly some of its major miners like polyus moving to renewable energy sources. If we look here again, actually I've plotted the European average, which is about half of that, the global average. And looking at our data, that's actually been declining since 2022. And that's set to decrease, continue to decrease into the future with moving to more renewables and lower carbon intensity of the electricity grids. Okay, so I'm going to pivot now a bit more to have a look at some of the topics around investing in Europe, new mines. Some of this was covered yesterday, but this is sort of, I guess, in addition to that. So we've had lots of news about policies, about frameworks of developing new mines in Europe. This chart on the left here is showing the capital expenditure. So capital expenditure, developing new mines or expanding mines in Europe. So this year, seeing a major component of this is coming from gold. And I guess that's expected with the gold price the way it is. That's only set to continue out into the future. The only one of the critical minerals really actually seeing much growth is lithium. Back in 2022, it was around $25 million. We expect around $750 million this year, and maintaining a fair proportion over the next few years. Obviously, there's quite a few projects in the pipeline. Sinovec, Kaliber project, many others that are moving along the song curve, having to raise capital, producing feasibility studies. But we'll look into some of the incentives around those projects in the next slides, whether they may or may not happen. So in terms of zinc, the Vares project entered commercial production, I think, this year. Then we have Lagoa Salida project in Portugal, released a feasibility study last year, tentatively entering production around 2026, 2027. I guess the one to point out, though, is copper, and it's definitely been a talking point. We need more copper mines. There's going to be a shortage. It peaked in our timeline here in 2023, but most of that capex, well, I think all of that capex, was related to expansions at current mines. So Bore Basin, Attic Mine, Neves-Corvo, that sort of thing. We've got it set to decrease into the future just because we don't have any more copper mines in Europe in our pipeline at the current time. So I guess that's more of a cause for concern, I guess. On the right, this is the number of projects split out by commodity and their stage of production. So most mines in the EU are coal mines. I guess that's with coal set to peak production again this year. That's kind of expected, possibly not discussed so much. And same with gold in terms of the number of projects in exploration and advanced exploration follows this trend of capex. By far more gold exploration projects in the EU than any other. And I think if we were to look at the exploration budgets, we see a very similar trend. In terms of copper's a fairly good performer in terms of the number of projects. And it's good to see actually lithium with a large number of feasibility studies compared to the number of projects that are out there. In terms of the countries, I think Sweden tops the list around 79 projects, then Finland with 74, and followed up by Spain, 44. Just outside the EU, within Europe, Serbia has the most projects at 45. Obviously, lots of projects in terms of copper, lithium, and gold. Okay, so why are companies developing these projects? So this chart on the left is showing the incentive price. So it's the price, the long-term price for a mine to set the IRR up to around 20%. So what price is required to get a 20% return or 14% return? So on here, I place $10,000. I think we're flirting with that price today. And I think on paper, price around $9,000, $10,000 per ton of copper is a good price to incentivize projects. But as we've seen, many companies, some of the larger companies, Freeport, Glencore, are still reluctant to actually go out there and develop these projects at this time. If you look at our copper pipeline and look at the capital intensity of these projects, we're looking at around $26,600 per ton of annual capacity. And that's of our, I think, 37 projects in the pipeline. And companies are no longer chasing the mantra of growth by all means. They're more focused on returning money to shareholders, buybacks, keeping margins. So I think it's safe to say companies are looking for higher copper prices and certainly more stable copper prices before bringing more projects online. And that's for some of the majors. If you're a junior, then it gets a lot harder. Okay, so what about lithium? Chart on the right here shows the margin for lithium producers at $10,000 per ton LCE. I think we're around that price today. As you can see, 40% of projects will actually lose money at this price. Now, it might be a bit different for some of the chemical producers. Some of these producers have long-term prices, long-term contracts. They might be isolated from this a bit more. But as we've seen, some of the newer concentrate hard rock projects that have been coming online in North America and Australia over the last year or so have actually sort of had to redevelop their mine plans, and actually a couple of mines have had to close. I think Finniss in North America is one example, due to the higher than anticipated operating costs. So I guess it's not a conducive environment for bringing on these projects. I know we've got a long pipeline of them, but I think there's a general trend that some of these are going to have to be pushed back until some of these prices improve. One other thing to note, I guess, while the prices of these is around what it is, it has encouraged some M&A in the sector. Rio Tinto, for example, bought Arcadium recently, and I think it's a good opportunity for consolidation in the sector. We'll probably see some more of that, where maybe Chinese miners and possibly some more of the majors will come in, consolidated their situation within the lithium sector. Okay. So, okay, there we are. I won't read through all of this. I'm just coming up to the end of my time anyway. I guess just to finish off what we were talking about yesterday, that incentives and some of the legislation and the Draghi report, it's all great and it's all fine, but the prices there need to be there to incentivize developing these projects. Right now, without a lot of help from other sources, these projects are not going to be profitable at the current prices. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Jason. There's some great insights there, particularly concerning, of course, is the lack of incentives for the long road we've got to bring the copper production up to what's required. But very good to hear about the emissions reducing on gold, particularly in terms of renewable energy sources for gold mines. So moving on from there, moving smoothly into European battery supply chains, please welcome Andrew Leyland.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. The four main points I want to get across in my presentation when talking about battery supply chains. The first that we'll see is the demand story is still very much there, despite all the negative press that we have at the moment across the lithium ion and electric vehicle sector. The second is that China is currently almost destroying margin across the entire lithium ion battery value chain. And obviously that's impacting the investment environment in North America and in Europe. Thirdly, that if industry and government doesn't actually take some action now beyond what they've already done, that Europe in particular is likely to stagnate in terms of supply chain development. And then finally, some slightly more optimistic news that most price levels that we're seeing at the moment, and we saw it a little bit in the previous presentation, are currently at unsustainable levels for a lot of the critical minerals that we deal with. So for those of you not familiar, SC Insights is independent research and consultancy. We primarily work on due diligence projects, supporting project finance, in particular for the various arms of the US government. We also do a huge amount of offtake commercial support. So in most critical minerals markets, you don't have a liquid terminal market like you do with gold or a lot of the liquid London Metal Exchange contracts. And that means that you rely on take or pay contracts to get financing and offtake for things like lithium, graphite, manganese. So we advise people on the commercial terms that go into those contracts as well. Enough about us. I'm going to get used to this. There we go. So here we've got the demand and production for lithium-ion battery cells. And you can see there, we've still got this political mandate to move to zero-emission vehicles. Lithium-ion is by far the winning technology there. There's probably almost $1,000 spent on lithium-ion battery investment compared to hydrogen at the moment. It's not really a competition anymore. And our forecast, similar with consensus, you've got about 20% year-on-year growth for the next couple of decades as we move to meet those targets to phase out internal combustion, generally around 2035, although you'd still be keeping some plug-in hybrids around then. Now, what you won't get from reading the press in Europe at the moment is this figure that we've got up there, that actually electric vehicle sales are up 22% year-on-year between January and September. But it's very different regionally when we look at this. So almost all of the growth that we've seen this year is coming from China, where actually almost 1 in 2 sales are now what they define as new energy vehicles. That's obviously not the case in Europe, and it's obviously not the case in North America, where vehicle sales are much slower. But even then, the numbers hide quite a positive story. If you look at EV sales in the US and you exclude Tesla, who've only really launched the Cybertruck at limited volumes this year, actually sales are up over 50%. And in Europe, you'll see a lot more product launches coming up next year, the next couple of years, which again are likely to boost the share of EVs. And when you look at the European supply chain, you can see here the opportunity that the industry has. We currently have 22 facilities operating in that part of the supply chain, the lithium-ion battery supply chain, excluding some of the other commodities that go in there. And you've got another 70 odd projects looking for financing. So there's a huge amount of opportunity there, not just in the extraction, but also in the processing of that. So you've got your lithium coming out of the ground, you've got your cathode, your cell manufacturer, your car plants, precursor materials that go into the anode as well. So why the negative press? Well, when we look at EV penetration, and that's probably what this chart shows on the blue line, we break that down into 4 different phases of adoption. The first one, if you go back to during the pandemic and before the pandemic, electric vehicle sales are actually limited by the supply of electric vehicles. Couldn't build them fast enough. The supply chains didn't exist. You had pre-orders of vehicles, something you'd never really seen at scale before. You had to wait 6 months to a year to get your new electric vehicle. Well, now we've moved beyond that. The supply chains have responded, and we moved into this red zone. And that's effectively where the sales of EV vehicles no longer limited by the supply of them, it's limited by demand. You still have nascent charging infrastructure in many markets, and you're seeing an increase in plug-in hybrids and mild hybrids, and we sort of see that as a bit of a stopgap technology while people don't have the confidence in electric vehicles. But then interestingly enough, when we look at China and some other markets, they seem to be moving towards this yellow phase. And that's where actually EVs outcompete internal combustion on every single metric. Not just total cost of ownership, but also the sticker price. Not just the ease with charging, the ranges, the acceleration, the comfort, that you actually start having to make a conscious choice not to buy an EV, but not to buy an internal combustion one. And I think there we may see quite a big increase, again, very market specific, as new models come out, and probably in Europe between sort of late 26, early 2027, a huge number of new models coming out where you're looking at, a 20 to 30% efficiency gain on the vehicles which are on sale today. And then you move finally towards the green side here, which is where you have that political mandate coming in. And that's effectively, where most of the vehicle manufacturing sites in the world have a 2035 cutoff for pure internal combustion vehicles, and certainly investment cycles that the OEMs are still working towards that kind of target. A lot of them have pushed it back, but 2035 still seems to be the main cutoff. So what's the problem? Well, broadly, it's that China's built this industry before anyone else, and they do that without necessarily planning to align supply and demand. So the dark green line here shows capacity utilization, already adjusted for capacity utilization, at Chinese battery plants. And you can see there that the capacity utilization of these plants is falling down towards 60% on a global basis. It's even worse in China because they haven't got all their cells on long-term offtake contracts. And that's pushed the market into oversupply. When the market's in oversupply, you reduce margins to try and keep your factory open and to try and boost sales. Well, why is that a problem? It means that if you're a factory in China, you already exist. You're probably not fully depreciated, so you still have maybe some debts to repay. You definitely don't want to close. You don't want to shut the jobs. So you sell at zero margin. Now, if I'm a project in Europe or a project in North America and I look at my financial model and my competitor makes a zero margin and I'm already a more high cost producer, well, I look pretty bad on paper. And that's why a lot of the projects across the supply chain are basically just stalling at the moment because they cannot compete with an existing industry that's been built. And the impact we can sort of see here on what's happening with average margins across the supply chain. On the extraction side, we saw a chart previously where a lot of these industries, particularly in lithium, no one's making any money. If you have a margin, an asset where you don't make any money and you want to invest, I mean, mining is an absolutely awful investment if you're not going to make a return on it. The refining side, particularly in lithium, is really being pushed into a toll refining business model now because they don't want to take on price risk. Again, it's very difficult to get financing for these operations. I think we showed earlier we've got 2 lithium refineries in operation in Europe, 27 projects, none of which are moving forward at the moment. The electrode side, the cathode and anode, again, a relatively low margin, bit more of a processing business with quite high intellectual property barrier. Not a huge amount happening at the moment. Umicore, one of the domestic champions, is reviewing its business with a new CEO. BASF have faced challenges with some of their assets, in particular of environmental concerns in Finland. Johnson Matthey was a big company in here. It decided to quit the business because the margins weren't high enough compared to its other opportunities. So again, this oversupply not just impacting the battery side of the market, also impacting the midstream of the supply chain, the electrodes, the refining, and indeed the extraction as well. So where is this important? Where does China dominate? Unfortunately, that's the red bars. So you can see that basically, from the cell manufacturer, the cathode, the precursor materials, your nickel sulfate, lithium refining, all of them very much dominated by Chinese supply. And that's really all the processing in the midstream, all of the manufacturing, everything that's actually location agnostic is dominated by China at the moment. Where it doesn't dominate, on the extraction of resources, obviously that's determined by geology and not by where you want to make your jobs. But even then, that sort of hides the Chinese ownership of a lot of those assets. So again, it really is a one country story at the moment. And actually, when you're looking for turning points in this industry, again, China is where you need to focus. The rest of the world at the moment are just price takers from the Chinese market. And again, China itself is struggling. I want you to think back to the first slide I showed, looking at that demand story, 20% growth pretty much year on year for the next couple of decades, which is what we've already seen for the past decade. No other market has that. None. Certainly not in metals and mining. Yet because we've been pushed into oversupply, margins have really come down and nobody's wanting to invest. And even in China, it will still take several years for the market to adjust. But here we're looking at refining margins in lithium. And this is for sort of, basically people who are buying material from Australia and converting it in China. And you can see throughout 2020, 2023, when prices were high, margins were very high in that industry. People were expanding like crazy. Now margins have collapsed. Nobody wants to take on any price risk and investments are stalling. But also it means that all those investments outside of China, where we were 3 to 5 years behind, just aren't happening. So again, at the moment, the sort of lack of planning within China is really destroying the investment environment outside. My next happy point, if industry and the governments don't act a little bit more and have a bit more planning, particularly the EU, is going to stagnate. So this is part of the supply chain people don't often see. We normally focus on the cathode, which is where your nickel, cobalt, manganese come into the market. But this is the anode side of the supply chain. China produces about 90% of the world's anode active materials. Europe and North America produce about 2%. You can't make a battery without the anode. And most of these projects, particularly in Europe, are not moving anywhere at the moment because they can't get the financing. They're even struggling to get offtakes for their material. North America, actually quite a few of these are moving. And that's because you have the Inflation Reduction Act. You have, in particular, the Department of Energy offering grants to early stage projects, the Department of Defense offering grants to early stage projects, and then you've got the Loan Programme Office offering up to 80% debt capital at favourable terms, and that's a federal subsidy. That doesn't include all the state level subsidies that you have as well. In fact, to be honest, many of the projects in the US are almost completely government funded. Europe, we don't have a similar program at the moment, and there was an interesting session yesterday talking about some of the challenges when it comes to financing. So there's certainly more that can be done there, both on a state level and on an EU level. The final point I wanted to get across was that the current pricing levels for most critical minerals are at unsustainable rates. We're nowhere near the incentive price for many markets. We looked at lithium previously, cobalt, very low pricing, multi-year lows. Nickel, current price levels are nowhere near the incentive level for any projects in places like Australia, Brazil, North America. But again, that's very much an Indonesia story at the moment, or Indonesia, Philippines and China story. Likewise, the manganese market, no projects outside of China are remotely viable at these price levels, and probably what you'll see in some of these markets, graphite included, is a two-tier system coming about. Because if you want to incentivize anything outside of China or outside of Chinese investment, where the money can be made further down the supply chain, you do need some protectionist measures or a bifurcation of the market pricing. And indeed, that's something that we're starting to see. And just the final point from me, just to give you an idea as to where we are, because this sums it up quite nicely. You look at the lithium market here between 2019 and 2023, we added 500,000 tons of supply. Believe it or not, we did that at an average price of $30,000 per ton lithium carbonate equivalent. In the next 5 years, we've got to add 1 million tons, twice as much, but with a price of about $12,000 today. So just to give you an idea of to where we are with the current challenge and some of the problems that we face. And that brings me to time. Thank you very much, and we'll have some questions later.
Thank you very much, Andrew. That's a very, very insightful talk. I think it's probably pretty good to see. I think we're beyond the tipping point of conversion to EVs in the world. It'll be interesting to see if that accelerates once China's sort of saturated its own demand. Moving on from supply chains to climate change. Next speaker is Andrew Bamber from Barra Consulting, who will provide us his thought or his insights into my design for climate change.
Richard, thanks very much for the kind introduction. Arthur and the MINEX team, thanks for the opportunity to speak at the conference. So as the program indicates, I'm going to talk on a few key points. We're We actually presented some of these points before at the Albania MINEX conference, relating to design approaches that we're developing in our group towards minimizing the impact of mines that we design on climate change. And more recent approaches developed out of some of the ESG work that we've been doing that assess climate risk and design for mines to be more robust in the face of climate risk and climate change. So a brief slide on the group at Barra Consulting. A couple of points on how mines directly affect and contribute to climate change. And then conversely, a couple of slides on how climate change, is evidently affecting mining. Talk about climate risk, so the risk that, again, evident changes in climate patterns and climate weather event intensities are actually having on mines. And I'll conclude on points where we would introduce design elements to make mines more robust to those changes. So just briefly on Barra Consulting, we're a boutique mining consultancy, in-house resource evaluation, mine design, process engineering, infrastructure, cost estimation and reporting, sort of usual suite of consulting tools for technical reporting, pre-feasibility studies, feasibility studies. We're multi-geography and multi-commodity. We're pretty broad within the group, even though we're again, boutique is another word for small. We're focused, I think, on EMEA, recent growth in the group. We opened a Canadian office a while back, but we've now got people in it. So we're doing more work in the Americas. Predominantly the work is EMEA, a lot of work that we've done in Eastern Europe, the Balkans, and a couple of projects in Central Asia and Australasia. So again, to sort of get to the core of the topic in terms of mining and climate, the metal mining industry affects the climate fundamentally and directly. It's an energy intensive industry, and we're not particularly good at using the energy that we do use. Not efficient at deploying energy types, and we're not efficient at recycling the energy that we use. These numbers are kind of so large you can't really get your mind around them. Mining consumes 2,000 million gigawatt hours every year. That's just direct on-site mining use of energy. If you add smelting and refining off-site, there's another 20% of energy to that. That's 10% of the energy in the world, and 80% of the electricity consumption in the world used by mining. They're just insane numbers, right? On top of that, so there's emissions relating to the provision of that energy. There are emissions relating to the consumption, particularly around internal combustion engines, which are prevalent, particularly at open pit mines, less so at underground mines. Compressors are direct sources of heat, and obviously smelting and refining are direct sources of heat emissions. On top of that, in terms of the total package of impacts on climate, mining, I think deforestation is an emotive word. It's not necessarily deforestation, but inherently mines, whether it's in a degraded environment, in semi-urban environments or pristine, I would say a minority of mining projects are done in pristine environments, but at the end of the day, whether it's pristine or degraded environment, mining for whatever the life of mine is, 10 or 15 years, it affects the land use pattern. Reclamation might restore that, and in some cases, reclamation might even improve the land use category after the mine is closed, but for that period, the land use pattern has changed. It's a very interesting map here of kind of the land use intensity associated with mining. 80% of the land use change associated with mining is in very specific geographies. There's a large amount of the world's surface that's, let's say, basically not affected directly by mining operations. So you can see a couple of green spots there in South America. Some hotspots in Indonesia. We all know what those hotspots are. A couple of hotspots in Central Asia, Southeast Asia, a couple of isolated spots. Not a lot of them in Europe, but I think based on things that people have said in this conference, maybe a few green spots going to be appearing in Europe over the next couple of years. Despite the gross impact that mining does have on the climate, that impact can be reduced. We can reduce our energy intensity. We can reduce the gross amount of energy that we use. We can reduce the energy footprint for the same amount of output. So simple approaches, looking at open pit mines, very easy to design open pit mines, so classic Australian truck and shovel operations, dig it out the ground, put it in a very large concentrator and produce and sell the concentrate. Maybe worth looking at an underground alternative to that and try and trade it off to see if you can make the underground alternative work, because you're inherently more energy efficient if you're going underground. Carbon neutral mobile machinery. We've looked at a couple of instances, actually now more than a couple of instances of battery electric implementations. Battery electric vehicles do improve the energy footprint of mines where the energy supply itself is renewable. Battery electric vehicles do not trade off positively against diesel fleet if their energy is from fossil generation. And then energy efficient process technologies, of which I will touch on a few in the next couple of slides. We can also reduce the physical footprint. Again, some what sound like basic approaches. Again, open pit to underground transitions, reduce the physical footprint for the same unit output. And ultimately, at the end of mine life, we want to look at superior approaches to reclamation and even adaptations of the reclamation approach that themselves are, let's say, a cash positive activity. So a couple of slides on physical and energy footprint. Again, approaches that we've looked at before. Again, in a previous life, I did quite a lot of this work when I was in Canada. Physical integration of the process circuit underground. Primary crushing underground's prevalent, it's not new. Crushing and screening underground is less prevalent, but it is done. The front end of your process circuit can be very easily integrated into an underground mine, and there are some examples, for a very long-standing example at Andina in Peru, where the entire process facility, the entire concentrator, 25,000 tons a day was put underground. I mean, they had other reasons to do that because they didn't have any flat ground, but it was done, and it's quite a remarkable. If you ever get a chance to go and visit it, it's quite a remarkable installation. Ore sorting, physical rejection of waste very early on in the mining process does reduce footprint. And again, like levels of waste rejection, somewhere between 40 and 60% of the mass rejected by a dry, low-cost, low-energy process, then puts a smaller volume of basically the same amount of metal into the grinding and the flotation circuits or the grinding and the leaching circuits, makes a big impact on your energy footprint, again, for what's effectively the same amount of metal output. As I said earlier, end of mine life can also be part of the footprint reduction approach. We're pleased to be part of a consortium together with Knight Pisold and so a lab that we often use in the UK, Grinding Solutions, looking at bespoke approaches to tailings reclamation, where the tailings can be remined for the residual value that's in the tailings, cash generative, and ultimately leaves an improved land use case post-mining than even the reclaimed or rehabilitated mine that we might be looking at. I want to touch on a specific case study we're quite excited to be involved in. A very early stage nickel copper cobalt project in Scotland. I don't think those words have ever been used in one sentence before, so historic moment. So our thrust's very interesting. It's part of the North Atlantic igneous belt, passes through the north end of Scotland, Rio and Goldfields, I think it was, explored in the 60s, and it sort of got parked for a bunch of reasons. And Aberdeen's developing it at present, and we're pleased to be helping them with that. This is the vision, it's very early stage, underground mining, battery electric fleet, pre-concentration to get the grade of the ore up and reduce the size of the surface facility. I think there's an option we're looking at the moment where, again, that process facility might be put underground. The magic bullet for Arthrath is work that they've been doing with Draslovka out of the labs in Australia on glycine leach technology, and I'll talk about the sort of game-changing impact of GLT and specifically around energy. So glycine leach, it's an amino acid, but it's an acid, and you can leach with acids, and the work that they've been doing at Curtin University and now being commercialized by Draslovka provides high recovery, atmospheric temperature, atmospheric pressure leaching of transition metals, and that fundamentally is the magic bullet. Lots of people have tried to get high recoveries at atmospheric temperature and pressure and failed. And the test work that we've been involved in demonstrates very, very good metal recoveries out of a sulfide concentrate directly into a sulfate-rich solution, out of which you can precipitate directly metal hydrosulfates, which are a key ingredient in the battery supply chain. So it's fundamental impact to the economic picture for the project to have a low energy, high process efficiency solution available. But it also directly tackles the energy intensity, because at the end of the day, the energy intensity of the battery supply chain is driven by the fact that in 99% of the cases, the ingredients are taken to a fully reduced metallic stage, and then the sulfates or related salts that are needed for battery production are then converted out of the metallic state back into the salts and then sold into the industry. That's a massively energy intensive flow sheet. The canonical examples in the middle there, HPAL, very energy intensive. In terms of adapting to climate risk, so looking at it the other way around, how do you design in elements into the mine that make it more robust to the climate risks? And those are essentially around precipitation and temperature. I think the one key impact case study I wanted to talk about today is really around arid areas where the precipitation patterns are changing. Either precipitation is increasing or the intensity of precipitation increases, and that directly affects surface water flow patterns at the mine site, to the point where places that previously didn't experience them are experiencing flash floods, which are inherently impactful to the mine operation. But there are ways to design around that. Understanding that climate patterns are changing and previously unanticipated climate events are happening at a more frequent basis. The design needs to accommodate for these unforeseen surface flows, despite the mine setting being in an arid region. The last point I wanted to touch on was, again, a sort of converse climate related impact, which is, again, it relates to energy. Recent work we've been doing over the last 2 or 3 years in Zambia, massive plus point. Zambia is 80, actually now I think this number's out of date, 80+% hydroelectric power generation. That's a good thing. Negative, Zambia is going through now a multi-year drought because of an extended El Nino event, so hydroelectricity doesn't work very well when there's no water. So what's happening in Zambia is a massive transition happening in the energy grid, where mines themselves are investing in what used to be renewable offsets, so something that would just offset your base electricity curve with a renewable project. They're now moving to fundamental renewable electricity supply themselves, because that grid electricity is not available. So in conclusion, mining contributes to climate change. Mines can be designed better to impact the climate less. Mines can be designed better to be more robust to the changes that are happening in the climate. And again, like particularly in areas where you might not expect it, like arid or high altitude locations, temperate locations that are becoming more extreme in terms of both temperature and precipitation. The approaches to do that are available. They just need to be considered by the likes of us who design them in the first place, and they can be built in a way that does impact the climate less and makes the mines more robust to the changes that are happening. Thanks very much.
That's excellent. Thanks very much, Andrew. The shocking statistic of 10% of world energy use is in the extractive industry. That's an amazing stat. But great to see the ways that can be reduced, which has to be a win-win. Reduces costs, reduces impact. Our next speaker is Philip Buttner, is the Recombine coordinator of the Helmholtz Institute in Freiberg. And he will be talking about technologies for a circular economy in the mining sector. Thank you. Thank you, Philip.
Yeah, welcome everybody. Hello, good morning, and thank you, Andrew, for this presentation, because I will follow up with my presentation to what you said. Yeah, I'm Philip Buttner from Freiberg, Helmholtz Institute in Freiberg. We are a research institute, state-funded, and I'm the coordinator of the Recombine network. And the Recombine network is something dealing with, as you can see in our logo, the two heaps, mine waste, and also this drop of water, it's mine water. So, and I will show you today what we are doing, what kind of technologies we are developing, and yeah, how we can help to make mining more circular. Okay, so. Yeah, I press it. Okay. No, yeah, good. Yeah. Here you can see our motivation. So what is our motivation? Maybe you know about the big accidents. There were some big accidents with tailings some years ago in Brazil. It's the picture in the middle. And there is a lot of a lot of danger coming from the tailings. Also, there are huge amounts of tailings produced every year. It's massive. You can see this nice picture here, this nice visualization of tailings produced already. And these are only the reported numbers, officially reported numbers. But I'm sure there's more tailings out there. And yeah, also we see in the construction industry. We hear about the sand crisis. We have a crisis with some materials also in the construction industry. And why not bringing that together? Why not using the mine waste for something, something useful? Why not using mine waste in the construction industry, transform it, and why not remine all of the metals from this mine waste? This is our motivation, and we started some years ago in 2018 to start the Recombine network with exactly this motivation. Okay. I'm not so lucky now. Okay, so what is our, maybe I skipped one here. Are you sure it is working? Yeah, good. Okay, sorry for that. Yeah, so I will talk about our technologies, the technologies we want to develop, and okay, now, when we talk about mine waste, we're talking about mine water, sludge, waste rock, but we also talk about tailings from the processing, and we talk about slags and ashes. And these materials are in our focus in Freiberg and with our community. Our vision is that we look not at local problems, because of course we can investigate for some local tailings that just occur in our region, some solutions, but it's not our focus. We are looking at worldwide problems, and then we are taking these problems, or we look where we have these problems in our region, and therefore we use our field laboratories. So we have more than 5 field laboratories where we can test technologies outside. So when I talk about field laboratories, I talk about tailing dams, I talk about mines, where we can do our tests directly in the mine on the water streams, for example. And when we identify these problems, these global problems, then we give this problem to our network, and then there are some teams applying for projects within our network, and then they can test their technology and develop their technology directly outside. And when the technologies are successful, of course, the next step would be to bring that to the world market. And we are exactly in this project phase right now. So we're having now 17 R&D projects running. Some of them are finishing that year. So the first ones. So we want to create puzzle pieces, technology puzzle pieces that make holistic mine waste solutions feasible. So that means we're developing processing technologies, or we're also developing some remediation technologies, different things. And we have more than 100 institutions. And our focus is not just that we develop puzzle pieces, we also have some people dealing with the social, let's say, acceptance of these technologies. So we bring together environmental technologies, resource technologies, Industry 4.0, digitalization is a big thing as well, and also some society, let's say, research. We are coordinating this, and we also have a very strong network to our partners in Czech Republic. So this is because we are based in the Erzgebirge, this is the border region to Czech Republic. So for us, it's very valuable to have partners also in the Czech side. And we receive in total 15 million euros of funding from the state of Germany to spend that for this R&D projects. We also bought with that money some special infrastructure, like a new plasma furnace we have now, and we want to go for projects more slag projects. So we're transforming slags and for the construction industry. This is a completely new infrastructure we have right now, and we're starting now projects also with that. But also we use, for example, bioleaching technology and hydrometallurgical treatment. Yeah. So our main challenges are, of course, the high volumes of the tailings, then that we have a lot of toxic elements in the tailings, so they can be released by weathering effects, like arsenic in the rivers or cadmium in the rivers. But the tailings are most of the time in abundant regions. So if you want to transform them into construction material, you have to think about the logistics and if it is really feasible to transport the material somewhere to use it as a construction material. We have on most tailings no available data. So also data acquisition is a very challenging thing for tailings. How can we analyze tailings very good? Tailings are most of the time very fine-grained, so if you want to remine them and using flotation technology, for example, there are limits with the grain size, so we need to lower these limits. We need to work on the limits of flotation, for example, to remine the valuable metals that are still inside. And also regulations and ownership is a big thing. Sometimes the state is the owner and the state just want to cover it, not investing any more money to remine it, for example. And when we work on these challenges, so we have 4 fields we work on. So first, analyzing. So we develop technologies that make it better to analyze these tailing dams. We want to transform tailings to construction material. We want to remine the valuable metals, and we want also avoid tailings. That means we are also working on sensor-based sorting technologies that can help mines in the future to avoid new tailings, new fine-grained tailings. And but what is behind this little graphic here? I will give you some examples of what we are working on. First, analyzing. We have one project. It's called Nirubis. This project deals with the team has a truck. The truck can lift up and push a probe directly into the tailing dam. That means they go on site with the truck. The truck is equipment you can rent all over the world, and they just bring their probe. And the probe has like a little window on the side, XRF. With the XRF the scanner, and while they're pushing it down into the tailing dam, they are measuring with the XRF sensor the tailing. Also, they get some other data from the tailing, like how dense it is and so on. And we combine that together with some mineralogical sampling. And with this combination, you can create a model of the tailing. And it's not so expensive like you go for drilling, for example, because you just push it in and then you get the data right now when you push it. We've done this, we have tested this, or the team, this Nirubis team tested it on one of our test sites. You can see the big picture down there is one of our test sites in the Erzgebirge, and it worked quite good. So they could create a model. Of course, there are some limits and detection limits and so on, but we are still working on a new project to improve these detection limits. From the transforming side, we have one project which is called Value. I told you already that we have now this new plasma furnace. This is the picture of it. And we want to use weld slag. So we want to recycle the weld slag. It comes from a company close to Freiberg. They have a lot of this slag. And we recycle this slag using this high temperature furnace. We are looking forward to start it for the first time. So we are very excited because it's very new for us as well, this technology. But we are looking forward that we really are able to produce iron and zinc from this weld slag, and also transform the left material to construction material, because the construction industry is really looking for these kind of materials in Germany. Then from the remining side, we are working, for example, on bioleaching. Bioleaching is also a very nice technology, because you can, when you take sulfidic mine waste material containing still some high amounts of, let's say, valuable metals like zinc, you can, and you have also at the same time some arsenic or some cadmium, then you can use the leaching and microorganisms to leach that out, and afterwards we extract this with hydrometallurgical methods. So as you can see here in the pictures, we have everything based in containers. So the future, or our idea is that we have in the future also more projects with this equipment. We will ship this equipment, or we are able to ship this equipment to tailing sites to do larger test works on site. That's why we use container-based technologies. And from the avoiding, we are also working on the digitalization. So that means here you see two projects. One is called RePNOI and the other DigiFloat, and they work together. The RePNOI project is dealing with tin recovery from tin tailings, and they're using pneumatic flotation cell for this. And the other project, DigiFloat, they are digitalizing this cell. So they are developing new sensors, and they also using AI supported, let's say, data processing to optimize the cell. So these both projects belong together, and they help each other, let's say. And the aim is really to make flotation cells better controllable for different feed materials. So this is also something we work, and this will help in the future to avoid tailings, because you are more effective and in the primary mining as well. Yeah, here you can see the bubbles, and they can measure also the size of the bubbles, and everything goes to a kind of a data lake, and then in the data lake they using machine learning and AI to control the flow. The cell. Yeah. Good. And okay, yeah. And finally, I want to show you a little flight over Freiberg, and I will show you one of our development sites. So this is one site. We have it directly next to the city of Freiberg. Here in the background, you can see already some houses. You will also see later the dome of Freiberg. So it's very close, and it's accessible for our research. And this is a very good opportunity for us, because the owner is a public company, and they allow us to work directly here on site, which is nice for us. Good. So if you want to work with us, and if you're interested in treatment of your tailings, if you have problems with your tailings, come to us. We have a website. You can check all of our projects on our website. Everything is available in English, of course. And if you're interested, just contact me, check out our technologies, and we are very open for new projects, upscaling projects of our technologies, and future challenges. Thank you so much, and see you around.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Philip. We need to have some conversations after this session. Particularly interested in attaching the XRF to the CPT probe. I think that's really exciting. And the containerized bioleaching, excellent opportunities on both those, and all the other technologies you talked about. So last but by no means least, on session 5, I'll just introduce John Curran, who will talk to us about improving mine safety whilst reducing energy use with ventilation on demand. Over to you, John. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Good morning, conference. Thanks to the organisers for the opportunity to speak today, and also congratulations to the speakers in the last couple of days. The content has been excellent. It's been gripping. I'd like to talk to you today about how we can improve mine safety by the use of some of our software that we manufacture. But just briefly, I wanted to introduce Howden as an organisation. You may not be aware of us. We're a large company, globally located. We manufacture fans across the world, and they're used in every industry. There's a strong chance that during the course of the last week, you've interacted with one of our fans moving air for you at some stage. We produce also compressors, blowers that are used in water treatment, steam turbines used for power generation, heat exchangers, all kinds of industrial high-value capital equipment. So you will see again our equipment is used on things like copper smelters. We have compressors there. We're owned by recently bought out by a company called Chart Industries, who are an American organization. They are very strong in LNG and hydrogen. So if you have vehicles that are powered by LNG, then again, there's a strong chance that we've been involved in that somewhere down the road. However, today, I think what I'd like to speak to you about is VentSim, which is a piece of software that we own, and how we can move on from a simple VentSim model of a mine and move on to actually control your air correctly and make your mine a safer place to be. So VentSim is a piece of software that's been around for quite a while. It's basically a system by which you can simulate your mine. You can create a 3D model of it, and then from that 3D model, you can model the air going through the mine, and you can take into account whatever gases may be prevalent in the mine, whatever vehicles may be passing through the mine, how your mine operates. And from that, you can produce, you can simulate how your mine operates, and then you can simply control your fan to give the right amount of air to the right areas at the right times. More importantly, it allows you to simulate fire or explosion scenarios. So in the event of an emergency, which obviously is an unplanned event, you can immediately go to your piece of software and tell your teams where they need to go, whether that's confinement or escape, where and when and how. Moving on from that, we developed a system called VentSim Control. This is a far more sophisticated piece of software, but it allows you to do more on your mine. So it's as you can see, it combines the ventilation modeling with a flexible control system and some advanced control strategies. So what we do is we customize the system so it works exactly with your mine, your systems, your instruments, and it allows us, instead of simulating the flow of air through your mine and the activities that are going on, we can actually track directly the movement of people and vehicles within the mine. We can monitor gases that are existing. We can monitor the condition of the air in terms of particulates. And by doing so, again, we regulate the amount of air that you actually need to use and therefore minimize the energy use in doing that. But more importantly, we make sure that where people are, it is safe. It is safe to operate. And it will give you an instantaneous output of where your people and your vehicles are. So if there is an emergency event, you can direct emergency teams directly to the place where those people are located. So if we take a look at ventilation optimization, which probably most mines have to some extent or other done, you would manually reduce the speed based upon a simulation of where you need air, or it could even be just a simple airflow monitoring at the site of the mining. Maybe you've got a couple of fans and you synchronize the speed between them to keep the efficiency point high. Maybe you've got some gas sensors or you've got some doors opening. So you simulate what that looks like in your optimization approach. We can work on, you schedule, we expect the mine to operate in a certain way, so we then plan that we will use a certain amount of air at a certain amount of time. What we want to do here is actually track the position of people and vehicles, and also monitor what doors are open, what doors are closed, so that we actually give you the air that you demand, not that we think you might need. So we can fit sensors to vehicles, We can fit sensors to the helmets of the workers on site. And we can actually, we don't just say there's a vehicle in the mine, we can put into our system what the vehicle is, what its emissions are. And as we track that vehicle going in or out of the mine, we actually move air specifically to take away the exhaust fumes from that vehicle. So, how does it work? We use the mine's existing infrastructure. We can work with pretty much any system that you have got in your mine right now. We will take information from the sensors about, or as I've discussed already, where people and vehicles are. We take those signals, we communicate them to the venting control system. From that system, we calculate where the air demand is and determine the necessary fan and regulator steer points. That is then communicated to the hardware. Then the hardware will take control of the system. It will open and close valves as necessary and regulate the fan speed as necessary so that you are using exactly the right amount of air. Not too much, definitely not too little, but exactly the right amount. By doing that, you're keeping the workspace safe, but also you are using the least amount of energy. And given the conversations that were taking place earlier about the amount of energy used in mining, of that 2,000 gigawatts, probably 10% of that is used in air movement in your mine. So, why are we recommending that this is a system that we should concentrate on? It improves air quality. It means that the people working at the face of the mine are getting good air, you're keeping them healthy, you're keeping them safe. It allows you to manage alarms. So if at some stage in your mine you get an alarm triggered because there's a gas response or because there's a too high a particulate level in a particular area, the system will take care of this. It will log any changes in the mine. So every time you make a change of any kind, you change a door, you change a piece of equipment, whatever, it will log it. So it's automatically done. You don't need to go in and intervene with that. It will help you to comply with your safety regulations, and it will do compliance monitoring. So you can report out from the system. You don't need to manually do that. As I've said already, it will help you create a safety route, give you those safety strategies in real time. It's not what we think, it's what we know. And I come back to air quality again because this will allow you to monitor and regulate in real time for air quality, meaning particulates, meaning explosive gases or poisonous gases. All of that we will take care of in this system. We can maximize your production using this system. So when you blast inside a mine, we can regulate the air so you get more airflow straight after the blast. You can clear away the dust and the debris quickly. You can get people back in and working again. We can manage your assets on that. We optimize your fresh air use. And by doing this, you can actually understand how many vehicles you can put in the mine at any one time. So rather than being the physical constraint will probably be more of an issue to you than the restraint of what air you're moving, whether you're clearing the emissions from the vehicles. And energy savings, it's hard to explain how much energy you can save without people scratching their heads and saying it can't be true. And I'll give you an example later. We will reduce the amount of energy you use by reducing the amount of energy the fan uses, by making sure you've got the right amount of air in, using our advanced controls. We regulate and operate the system, and you will see savings of between 10 and 50% of energy consumption. So if you have a main fan on a reasonably large mine at 1.5 megawatts, you're going to save potentially 750 kilowatts. You're going to halve that energy usage. That is a serious amount of money. In terms of the control system, it's a really easy to use system. It's very intuitive. It's very simple. We have a full-time team of developers, and we constantly feed back to you as clients. So if you want to come to our table later, I can give you a card. Every year we have events in User Conference. So your teams can come and sit with us. We will explain to you what the latest developments are, what the latest solutions that we have that allow you to modify the way you work. We integrate with every kind of system. We haven't come across a system yet that we can't integrate with, so there are no issues with interoperability. and it's fully integrated with the Ventsim model. So what that means is that you can access this system from anywhere in the world. If you want to know what's going on in your mine, you can go into this system wherever you are and see it. You can work with it. Okay. There are 5 levels of control. This is a fully bespoke system. Every system is different. So the basic control is obviously manual. Then we move on to the automated scheduling system where we plan out what you're going to do. Then we go into the flow and gas sensor integration. This is where it's getting more sophisticated. Then the tracking integration. Now this is the level that most people would want to go to. This is the point where you get the best control. And then finally, if you go to level 5, we will take control of everything. We will have everything on screen, so you don't need to do anything. No manual interventions required at all. I have been going quickly, and I'm sorry for that, but I'm conscious that I'm keeping you from your coffee. So this is my last slide. In terms of reference sites, I don't know how easily you can see that, how visible it is, but we have sites all across the world. Predominantly, they tend to be larger sites just now. That's because the larger sites make the largest savings. You'll see some big names up there. You'll see the Glencores and you'll see Rio Tintos and so on. We tend to find that once a mine owner or an operator has our system has used it, they come back and they want to use it again in their other facilities. And the final of this, I know this is focused on safety and about keeping people safe in a mine, but we can give you a reference site here, which is on this screen, which is in South Africa. Excuse me, it's not. It's in Australia. It's called Agnico Eagle's Fosterville mine, and we were able to pay back the cost of this system in 6 months, which is a significantly short amount of time. So I can't give you a cost of what it would put to this system in your mine because everyone is bespoke. It's not cheap, but you will pay it back. You will pay it back and you'll have a safer mine. So that's my presentation. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you very much, John. Excellent. Another double. I was about to say a double win of improving safety and reducing costs, and then you trip over. So first of all, let's thank all the panel members for keeping absolutely perfectly to time. That does leave us with about 10 minutes or so for questions. So I'll open the floor to questions. There'll be a microphone that will come around. So if you could just say who you are, who you represent, and what your question is, and who you're directing it to, please, and we'll go from there. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Vanis Richard Woodless area. My question is for Andrew Lehman. Your presentation was very interesting, and I wish that it was very good that you said the facts. And it's really common challenges there when we talk about this type of projects. There are a couple of influencing factors, perhaps the issue as well in today's role. It's geopolitics. It is guidance on these integration as well. And the other thing you already mentioned is technical expertise, especially if you're talking about lithium refineries, business project and concentrate processing. That actually in order to mine all operating refineries in China, except one in Western Australia. So it's a big technical challenge for these facilities. My question is really, you did refer, I think, on a couple of occasions to 2 existing operating refineries in Europe. What do you mean, which refineries? Are you talking about carbon spodumene processing, mining refineries? What did you mean really by these 2 references? Which references are these?
Those 2 specifically, so you're starting, I think we've included the first ramp up of AMG in Germany. The other one is Leverton in the UK, which technically they're taking sort of off-spec carbonate and producing lithium chemicals, not necessarily for the battery supply chain, but they have been producing that for some time. And then you've got the 2 operations in Russia, which we didn't include. Just quickly to get to your point though on non-Chinese refineries, there are other operations out there, obviously produce battery grade material specifically from brines, whether that be material that's then processed in the US or in Latin America.
And then you've got the operations in Australia, which are, I guess, the famous ones at Kemerton and Pirano, etc., who are really struggling to ramp up because they don't necessarily have the expertise that the Chinese have. And you see that across the supply chain, that actually it's very difficult to build anything, whether it be a cathode facility, an anode active material, or lithium refinery, without the expertise and experience, practical experience that China has.
Thank you. Who's next? Okay, unfortunately, I have a couple of questions pre-prepared. First one to Jason. Do you think there are sufficient incentives to decarbonise the mining industry?
I guess there are two ways of looking at it. This morning we spoke about CBAM, which is more of a stick approach, so imposing carbon taxes, and then the other is the current approach, which is premium. So I guess we've seen that with things like green aluminium, the copper mark, which proposes premiums for copper. As again with steel, it's green accounted steel and green accounted iron ore. Right now, I think the premiums we're seeing are 1 or 2%, nothing major. I mean, is that worth the extra capex for changing your trucks from diesel to battery powered? Suggest probably not at the moment. So I think we definitely need more incentives to do so. I guess the problem with this is that these extra premiums are then passed on to the consumers down the chain. So do they really want to pay extra 10, 20% maybe when these prices have gone to, I don't know, cars, for example? So I guess to answer the question is no, we're not seeing but yeah.
Okay, thanks very much, Jason. There's a question for Andy, if I'm trying to find it. Can you remind me, Andy, what the question was? I can't remember either.
I've got a question for...
Okay. Go ahead.
There's noticed on one of your slides there that you had the split out of tailings. Yeah, why is copper so much higher than everything else? Is that due to the grades? Maybe should be asking you that.
That's a good question. I can't. I think maybe because of the grades are getting lower, and then you need to mine more material, and then that's why you have more tailings. Then maybe that is the reason, but I'm not sure. I found this. It's based on the numbers of this international committee of mining and minerals. I think the numbers, and they are very reported, but I'm not sure why it's so high.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I do have a question for Philip. Very interested in learning more about the XRF attached to the CPT probe. What sort of spacing of CPTs do you think you would need to achieve resource estimation that is usable? I don't want to classify it necessarily, but just one that can actually give a reasonable representation of what's still in the tailings as a resource.
I think this technology is a bit limited to these detection limits and to the let's say to the tailing dam itself, how the tailing dam is structured. But sometimes if it is too dense and too hard, you cannot push it through it, and you always have to combine it with some mineralogical sampling. And but what you can do is when you have some, I think they call it proxies. So I'm not the expert in it, but they measure a few minerals there, and then they can estimate the other minerals that are left. So
assemblage that they'll be associated with.
Yeah, but it's a combination of data. It's not that you can just use this XRF probe, the data from that probe. You have to combine it with some mineralogical analysis from samples you take from the. But you don't have to drill the whole tailing dam, and you don't have to drill 20 drill holes there because drilling is expensive. So sampling and the lab testing is expensive, so it's a kind of a combination to make it cheaper to get an idea.
And it would be good because it would combine as you were mentioning, it would combine obtaining the geotechnical information from the CPT together with an indication of the mineral content. So you're providing information for the actual physical remining of the tailings, knowing what the best method is, whether it's going to be strong enough to excavate by conventional trap and shovel, or whether you're going to have to mine it using water and clarifying it in situ. So
yeah, exactly. And you will also be able to, because you can, with the technology, because it's cheaper, you can make more holes or more pushes.
yes,
And then you will also find some, let's say, secrets of your tailings, because for example, in Germany, they used the tailings for dumping waste in the 90s. So they excavate the material, they sold it for the construction market, and then they fill it up with construction material and also some sewage sludge. So we drove one day, and it was smelling horrible. We found out that was a secret deposit.
Yeah, unfortunately, a lot of mines in the past have seen the tailings down as a sewer and a lot of domestic waste and mine brown water goes into it rather than what's supposed to go in there. Okay, let's open it back to the floor. Has anybody thought of any questions from the floor, please? Any more from the panel? If not, we're pretty close to about 2 or 3 minutes early. Hopefully Arthur will be very pleased with this as a session. I'll hand over to Arthur, who's got some announcements to make in terms of where we go from here.